Welcome back to At Its Roots, exploring America's commitment to childcare. If you thought the soil was shallow last episode, just wait until we start pulling at its knots. This episode is called Tangled Roots because the deeper we dig, the more we find a mess of policies, power struggles, and flat out contradictions that shape the early childhood system we've inherited today. From civil rights to welfare reform, and from who got help to who got punished, we're looking at ways care, race, and control became intertwined. Today's panel is ready to pull no punches and pull every root. Let's get into it. So today is going to be amazing. We have Rebecca here. Say hi, Rebecca.
Hello, everyone.
And so we're going to be talking about a lot of things today, and they're going to be hard hitting. We're going to be talking about redlining, public broadcasting, community care models, and funding equity, and how all of these impact ECE and the fact that none of these are separate. Before we dig into this conversation, though, I do want to explain what redlining is for those of you that may not know. Redlining was a government-backed practice that started in the 1930s where banks and lenders marked off neighborhoods, mostly Black or immigrant communities, as too risky for loans. If you lived inside those red lines, you were often denied home loans, business loans, and even access to basic services. It didn't just block families from building wealth. It cut off entire communities from things like good schools, transportation, and yes, childcare. And those effects are still felt today. So a lot of the times when you live in a childcare desert, there is a chance you may live in an area that may have been initially redlined. It made it harder for you to get loans in that area because you may have lived in that area. You may live in a very diverse area, and your area may be marked as one that they are not willing to give people loans for certain things. So you don't have like my area does not have a child care center in it. It does not. We have family child care homes, and we have one Head Start that is connected to a church, and that is it. We have nothing else. And it is very hard to get business loans in this area. So that is current. That would be a current way that redlining could be impacting you in your area. So now we're going to be talking about all of these because all of this matters. When children and families don't have the access to the things that they need, a lot of it does come from things that happened in our past. So redlining didn't just impact housing, it also shaped access to community resources. And then it also brings up the fact that PBS was born out of this and people not having access. So we're going to be talking about that also. So let's talk about redlining and how it impacted access to resources like childcare and schools and stuff. So what would you like to say, Rebecca, in regards to this first one? Because I mean, I got lots of thoughts.
I think in a lot of ways, when you're looking at historical communities, whatever socioeconomic that originally built that community, it very much lives with it through changes in it. Whether you go into and you're gentrifying a community that was a lower socioeconomic status, you still have a hard time from the bank getting that loan to reinvigorate that community. You also have, when you're looking at around the Bay Area, for example, part of that low socioeconomic or high socioeconomic, it kind of moves around in a circular position when you're looking at that. So an area that had larger socioeconomics, higher socioeconomics, rather, that maybe didn't have as many children, doesn't have as many family childcare homes for them today. But when that community was originally made, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a larger amount of children today, but now it's just plain out of space. Where are you going to build another school to fit the needs of the children that are there now versus when the community was built and it originally didn't have so many children, versus in maybe lower socioeconomic areas, which we know from statistics generally tends to have more children present, that may have a larger amount of the ability for parents to find care in those areas. And so these original architects of that area in many ways are still with them today, be that a positive thing or a negative thing, just depending on where it's located and what you're trying to do. And especially when we're looking at childcare deserts, where I have come from in the part of California, it's one of the very few counties, as you know from the other policy work that we've done, that actually has gained family childcare because of this huge population change that has happened, that COVID helped along, of persons who could work from home and so now have moved to more rural areas that may not have had as many services as they did before, but now there is that larger demand. And so then people are rising to meet that demand in many ways.
So it could be argued that family childcare actually, especially because it largely did start within Black and Brown communities, and lower socioeconomic communities, is the fact that it was easier to open up a family childcare home than it was for you to
Absolutely.
open up a center. If you lived in a red line district, you weren't going to get a business loan for you to be able to open up a childcare center in that area. But you could very well open up your home and take care of the children within your community and not have to argue with someone about the fact that your community needs this service, and they won't give you the loan just because you live in an area with a high immigrant or a high ethnic group population, which is
Not
what
only that, but
usually
tax
happens.
base. If you want a
Yeah.
tax base to build a new school or to build a whatever it happens to be, family childcare co-op or center co-op, there just isn't that. And so family childcare meets that need in areas that couldn't get those loans. And when we're looking at culture, for example, it is also those areas that in many ways tend to actually value that family childcare, that values the relationship. And in so many other that are of higher socioeconomics, they don't have that value. It is seen as more of a throwaway type service that isn't valued.
Very true. You, in areas that are not redlined, you have more what I call boutique preschools. So you have these
Yes.
very high priced preschools that basically, if somebody in a red line community wanted to go to, they may not have access to it because they're not making the money to be able to access that resource. So now it comes down to what they have in their community, and a lot of times it was family childcare that was in that community. Now the other issue becomes that family childcare, you have high quality people, they don't have access to high quality resources
And
because of
transportation.
that.
How are they going to
Yes,
get there? Do
there,
they have a
yes.
car? Are they relying on public transportation? Historically, is this walking? Do you own a bike that you're going to put somewhere? How are you going to transport your children if you have, bike, car, etc., you name it? And so
So
then
yeah.
there are other things that go along with that you need to be able to access those services. Shoes. Think of how shoes have been made over time, how we just throw away shoes these days, how cheaply they are made. versus you look at what the types of shoes that your grandparents wore, and it's like, man, those shoes look terrible. They look stiff. They look
But they
hard.
lasted a long time.
Exactly. They lasted and they took care of them. They shined them, they polished them. Over time they did get looser and were more comfortable, for example. And that really just, goes back to what we're investing in life and how we treat it and what the public attitude is of today versus yesteryear.
Yeah. And so now redlining is still very much a thing. They don't like to admit it, but it's also why a lot of times neighborhoods don't seem to advance despite the fact that there are people in the neighborhoods. They will go to college and they'll come back to their neighborhoods that they were living in, and they will try and open up grocery stores, and because that is a part of the redlining, having access to grocery stores, having access to public transportation, having access to clothing stores, all these places that should be in these neighborhoods because these are neighborhoods that have been around, and somebody comes back and they can't get access because they want to grow the neighborhood, and they want to improve it for the people already living there.
Yeah. And
They
they get
don't want it.
discouraged.
Yes, and
And
that
many of them give
stops it.
up.
Yeah. So then you have these neighborhoods that were redlined and they're considered bad neighborhoods to live in until somebody gentrifies it. But then the question becomes, you're
Then it's
pushing out.
polished.
Yes. And it gets a fancy name, a fancy new name. And you're
Right.
sitting there and you're like, but there were all these people that were already living there for generations. And all you had to do was let them open up their businesses and live in their neighborhoods. And the neighborhood could have improved with the people already there. But that's just one of those, redlining is stopping the progress of community resources. But having a lack of access also um, it impacted children's learning in such a way that they did not have access. And I know people were talking about urban areas not having access, but this was also an issue with rural areas.
It's very much an issue with rural areas when you're looking at accessing, whether it's higher education. Again, how are you going to get there? The school, for example, my elementary school, where I grew up in a rural area, I was not walking there. It was miles on the other side of the freeway,
Oh
actually.
my goodness.
And so we used the bus. The school bus took, almost everyone, unless you could walk to the school, you use the school bus. And today we live in a much more urban area. They don't even have school buses. You
Oh
can
yes.
ride the school bus if you have an IEP and a qualified diagnosis, which typically is a physical one. Our son with cerebral palsy, for example, has the bus. But everyone else, their parents have to drive them, they walk, they take public transportation, etc. So in rural areas, this is a big thing. Someone had to take me to school if I missed the bus.
Yes.
And so
Oh yes.
you didn't miss the bus, because if you missed the bus, mom had to take time out of her business to take you. And there was probably some other motivation that came along with that to motivate you to not miss the bus next
Yes.
time. And the community college for us is 45 minutes away
Very much so.
from where I lived. And you're not taking a bus. There's no public transportation in order to get there. You had to drive, versus many people in urban areas, even today, don't have driver's licenses because public transportation is easy. More things are in walking distance. You have a higher amount of population. Things are close together, etc.
Insurance is high, there's parking issues, it just makes sense. And so the city has a incentive to keep the buses going, but even in the city areas, the redlining will prevent bus routes from going into certain areas
You've got to
that
walk
actually
further.
and they could benefit from those. So urban areas and rural areas really do suffer a lot when it comes to
They look
access
very
to
similar.
resources and redlining and everything like that. But then when you're talking about those types of things, Sesame Street was born out of trying to make sure that children in urban areas had access to educational possibilities. And I think sometimes people forgot that children in rural areas also needed that help and access to stuff, because they may not have had a preschool in their town. They may not have
There
had
wasn't
someone,
no
there might,
preschool in
yeah,
my town.
there probably wasn't preschool in their town. It probably was a long ride trying to get a child to a childcare or early education program, because rural areas and urban areas would, there was a high probability that you might have lived or still lived around family and they're providing that care and stuff. And not
Absolutely.
all people are natural teachers. So
No, they are not. And there are some fantastic parents, as we talked about or touched on mental health in the previous episode, that are fantastic parents. But they cannot be fantastic parents
and
without
teachers
their own mental health,
being, yes,
so that they can take care of themselves in order to take care of their children. And children need a break from adults also. They need their
yes,
own time. And growing up for us, PBS was the only kid programming. My
oh
parents
yeah,
did not buy cable. I don't even, sheesh, to cable. I don't even know if there was cable access where we were rural, like super young growing up. There was later, obviously. My parents did get cable like after I moved out and went to college.
yeah.
No cable in the house when I went 2 years at the community college. It wasn't until afterward. But we grew up watching PBS and Sesame Street and Schoolhouse Rock. That
Oh, I
was how we
love
learned
Schoolhouse
all of these
Rock.
things. I'm just a bill. I'm only a
I'm only
bill.
a bill,
I'm
and
going
I'm
to the
going to the
Capitol Hill.
Capitol Hill. Yes, or yeah, and then that was how my favorite song was Figure Eight. Figure Eight. I was like, yeah, that's how I. That's how it helped me.
That's how we memorized the preamble.
Yes. Oh yes, I remember
For
that.
the United States of America.
And I show that to my program now.
And it's like cringy. It's like we watched this and we loved it and we
Loved it,
knew
and we,
every moment of it.
yes,
You guys
but
should
it
be
was
so happy what you have today because this is where it came from.
right. But I feel like, and the question is, do you think it lived up to the promise of providing access to early
Um,
learning?
in many ways, I feel like it did. I mean, that's how we can still remember the preamble today, quite honestly. So we've sang it so many times. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, one of
Oh
my
my
absolute
goodness.
favorites, when he would put the videotape in, you get to see how things were made and how they were done. That was amazing. Some
I
of those
think
videos, I still do some of those Sesame Street things
she,
in my
yes.
program today. LeVar Burton, and
Yes.
one of his reading rainbows was about Humphrey, the humpback whale that came
Oh
in and
yes.
swam up. And honestly, maybe it's a little nerdy of me. Newsflash, I'm a nerd. If you guys, teacher nerd, but it's actually kind of amazing to me that as a kid watching Reading Rainbow, reading the humpback whale, where he swam up and through that channel, I actually live like 30 minutes from there. Is a
So
little
that
bit
must have,
crazy.
yeah, no, and that's, but I think that just us talking about it and singing the songs and being able to remember all of this and still using so much of it now just shows you the
Absolutely.
power of PBS and of Sesame Street and all of that. I mean, I Miss Piggy was my girl, okay? Like Miss Piggy was my girl. My favorite one, I just showed my preschoolers before we went on summer break, and they looked at me like I was crazy because I was walking through and I was singing the I got a new way to walk,
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 walk.
walk.
Yeah,
Yes, loved it. That was my favorite thing ever. And
yeah,
I was walking around and doing it, but one of the best things was that I lived in like I lived with my grandma for a little bit in New York, and seeing them broadcast in neighborhoods that look like the neighborhood I was living in with my grandma. What have seeing the different children that were all over the place, and
Mhm.
everything. They
Yeah.
now they did show farms and stuff like that. They did make an effort to show different environments and
Yeah,
stuff
absolutely they did.
and everything. I feel like, I mean, I was such a nerd. Oh my goodness. My Ghost Rider, I mean, I went from Sesame Street, I went to Ghost Rider, I was watching Arthur. I mean, I was watching
Love
all.
Arthur.
Yes.
Masterpiece Theater at
Yes.
the end. I remember the cheesy cartoon where it's black and white and then he walks up to it and he opens the door and it creaks and it falls down. But
Yes.
yeah, those are all the things.
Like all.
What about the Stargazer guy? At the very end
Oh,
at night, and he would come on and then had like the
this.
digital CGI
Yes.
behind him.
Yes. But all of
Absolutely.
that made a difference. All of that had such a positive impact. I love reading. I understand the impact that songs can have on children learning because of the impact that Sesame Street and PBS had on me. Masterpiece Theater, oh my goodness. My mom and my grandma used to sit me down and we would eat cheese and crackers and be fancy. I had no idea what was going on this Masterpiece Theater, okay? But we were being fancy and we were eating crackers and cheese and olives and we were all fancy and drinking tea. Okay, like we this was our way of having culture
Yeah.
brought to us in our living rooms. And I don't think, as much as I love learning and the impact that my kindergarten teacher made on me as a kid that made me want to be a teacher in the first place, I credit the fact that my grandma, my mom, my grandpa, we all sat down and we watched
Yeah.
Sesame Street and PBS together.
We would watch TV together. And I feel like a lot of families do not do that same thing. Just the way society changes over time. They're not watching those shows that, terrible phrase maybe, mindless television.
Yeah.
So much of today is mindless television. And yes, we all need a break. You and I, we have
Yes.
some TV indulgences that we do, in fact,
Yes.
enjoy. But
I
the
tried Love Island.
family,
It did not work out. It did not work out. It was too much for me.
the
But
family time that was around watching PBS was valuable time because, as you know, we give time in different ways. You have the different love languages. Sometimes that's just being with someone. You don't need to be talking to them. You can be
yeah,
focused on the, other things. You're just in their presence versus, just all of the other different love languages. And for many of them, we've lost that kind of as a society. And so I feel like, especially for PBS, that brought in so many different things and ideas and cultures, around the world to your home. Whether you lived in rural, because there was no cable, and you had like four stations,
oh yeah,
grand total. There were no
the
cartoons.
antennas, the
Yeah,
antennas.
the antennas, the dial on the TV. But
Yes,
we weren't so. There were no wind up TVs. No one was that old for
yes,
us, but yeah, it was different. And that in many ways shaped society and learning and that investment. When we talk about preschool studies and how what preschool is that affects the rest of learning, when your family is vested in that learning of that child, that's what makes the difference. It's
oh
not
yeah,
the academics, because as we know from the studies, you can throw all the academics of the kids and be engaging that you want, but it's that family attitude towards learning and how they
learning.
incorporate it in their daily life. That's what makes the difference for people. So PBS was a big thing because my parents would watch it. They would watch the
Yeah,
Masterpiece Theater. They'd watch the Stargazing guy. And there was another mystery show. But yeah, that's, where it came from.
yes, and I love that. And that actually leads us into, we're talking about family engagement. Now we're going to go, we can talk about the fact that how the Black Panthers and Head Start got started, because these were community things with Black Panthers. I clearly remember as a child going to my neighborhood. My grandma could not cook to save her life.
Oh
I don't know
no.
how. No. So I'm not sure how this woman made it out of North Carolina. My great grandma could throw down. Okay. Literally the only time I gained weight. They'd get there, they'd call me a toothpick, and I'd leave, and I'm just a toothpick, but now I've got a round stomach. It was just, but and she left the North Carolina without knowing how to cook, and the only person that could cook in the house was my grandpa. So, but if grandpa had to go to work, so if I'm left with grandma all day, I'm going to starve, right? There is the community lunch program, which, the Black Panthers started in their neighborhoods. They started their early education programs in their communities. They made sure that the community had access to these programs because, again, redlining prevented them from having them in their communities and starting them the way they wanted to. They pulled their money and their resources together to begin them. Now, Head Start saw what was happening, and Head Start was able to form, but kind of Head Start starting and coming in kind of squashed what the Black Panthers were doing. So if you watch the episode before, y'all are you'll be able to see the clear line of where all of that intersected. But they both created early childhood programs rooted in community care, and this was
Yeah, the survival program.
yes, this was grassroots models.
Yeah.
And that still can apply today because family childcare educators roll out. And I remember before I got orders to come to California, me and another family childcare educator got together, and we were like, we were going to create our own model. I am not a baby person. I am a they're your child's talking back to me person. I love when little kids. I love
Your
sassy
child
little
has an
kids.
opinion person.
Yes,
You
and
appreciate their
so
opinion.
yes, and so when, but she liked babies, so she was going to take care of the children until they reached toddler preschool age, and they were going to be funneled into me. And I was going to make sure that all my parents that had infants went to her because I had a lot of young families that were getting pregnant. And I was like, okay, well, I don't take infants. So, but so she was going to be the one that took infants, and she was going to funnel me all of her preschool pre K, and I was going to funnel her all the infants.
Mhm.
And that was supposed to be, we got together and decided that was what we were going to do. That's grassroots community building of an educational
Right.
program and stuff. But
I
is it
think that
truly? Oh no,
equitable
go
for
on.
sure. I think that again goes back to a lot of cultural tendencies that are not felt in other cultures. They don't have that same connection of community. And the Black Panther doing that, that was kind of revolutionary for the
Yeah,
time, for a community to stand up and have the breakfast program. And a lot of that legacy can really be felt today in improving health outcomes, promoting education, because they understood that the way to get up and get out of this was education. And that's where this Perry Ellis study came from. That's that classic study from the late 60s, early 70s that says if your kid doesn't go to pre K, they'll be a juvenile delinquent. Those persons that were in that study, they had that parental and family unit involvement. And that is not what the emphasis is on pre K today. It's on academic education. But
this is
that
very true.
that is based on everything, they had support where the teacher came to the home. They phoned in if they had a phone to check in if they couldn't be there. And these parents voluntarily joined that study, and they were of a lower socioeconomic, darker skinned group of
But that
persons for
through
that
that
state.
throws a but and that throws a wrench into the natural biases that people have, is that social people in the lower social economic scale, those that have a certain ethnic background, do not have don't take education and stuff seriously, and
Right.
don't and are not as involved, despite the fact that what really ends up happening is that sometimes if you do not have the money, you have to constantly work, that might actually impede you, and you're looking for a
Right.
program that was
Prevent
going
you
to
to support
help
your
you.
children.
Yeah, and you're looking for a program that's going to help you make what because you consider education important. You don't have you don't have I'm gonna say you don't have the spoons to make sure to do it as well as you would want to. So now you have a community program that's giving you
Coming
that boost
alongside, being that
and
village.
yeah, and helping you. And I feel like that's what the Black Panthers and later on Head Start turned into, is that they help they help the parents in the become a part of the community, give them those tools, make them feel like that they're doing that. Yes, we understand you're busy, we're going to make sure that we help you get these resources, we're going to provide you information for being able to do this at home with your child, things you can do at home with your child, like watch PBS or
And
play
so,
games outside.
right. And the Perry Ellis study was not the preschool that they placed them in to do this study. It was not the academic driven preschool that we have today. It was a
No.
much more hands on, holistic, self help, all of those whole child concepts
Yes.
that we kind of think of. And so, even though today's academic preschool is based on that Perry Ellis study in many ways, I feel like it's lost sight of what it was really there to do, because it's turned into
Yes.
something that is actually the opposite of what it was based on. And
Very
so
much
in
so.
many ways, it the system of it is flawed when we're looking at institutionalized education and the emphasis that we place on it today, and the push that we have a society for children to place their kids there. It's not the village, the
Village that we, yeah.
holistic concept that they were looking for that impact and legacy.
It could be argued that Head Start has now moved away from its grassroots and
It
its
absolutely
community
has.
care model. I've heard from a lot of people that they do a lot of the paperwork that's involved, and some of it does take away
Yeah.
from a lot of the connection that the educators feel with the parents and the children and their programs and stuff. So there's it again. This does go back to instead, we need a national child care system, but how do we make sure that it's based on community, that its roots are community driven and not institutionalized,
Yeah.
and actually providing what the community needs versus what some talking head that
The
has never
idea,
been into the community
right, of what the
says.
community
Yeah,
needs.
because
Exactly.
often what the community needs versus what someone else says don't doesn't quite match up,
Right.
and then you don't see that. So then the people that are in charge of the programs will get blamed because the people that the talking heads don't see the gains, and the people that are there in the community are like, there's absolutely gains. I now have 20 parents that show up for these events versus the 5 that I had at the start. I
Right.
now have whole families that show up to my events versus only one person being able to. But that's not what they're looking at. I mean, a whole other conversation would be the reliance on standardized testing and how that actually has impacted a
Right. It's
lot of
been a
the
hurt,
institution,
not a
yeah, and stuff. But this also goes into equitable. We don't have an equitable public funding model for early education, but is it going to be institutionalized when that happens?
I think the government's idea of an equitable funding model is institutionalized education. Look at this huge pre-kindergarten push that's across the system, how many of those have a true mixed delivery system versus putting that emphasis on a 3 or 4 year old can attend free public education as long as it's connected to the school system? It totally disregards the fact that learning and education and the foundation of it for that age range is not academic. And in fact, here in California, the news reports have come out that when they first started it, actually, we based it off of kindergarten and that was wrong. We need to change these things.
Oh,
And it just
yes.
goes to show that they didn't understand what was developmentally appropriate for 3 and 4 year olds in the beginning. And it denies, going back to that idea of a parent's authentic choice for their
Choice.
children. They're making that choice based on societal pressure and financial pressure, not
Right.
may actually be the best fit for their child.
Right, because you have, if you've got two friends down the block that are sending their TK child, their child to the TK, and you are like, but my child is doing all the same things in the family childcare program that I've got them enrolled in, but
And they don't have
maybe I
to
need
sit
this.
forever or hold
Yeah,
pencils forever
ever,
because
yeah.
the makers of the program don't understand that they don't have enough bones in their hand like they do in kindergarten.
And yeah, there's not the ability to individualize education as much. And that's not us saying that TK doesn't have its place. We absolutely understand that there are children that thrive in that type of
Right.
environment.
A parent's
Again,
authentic choice. Always,
always
always parents' authentic choice.
making sure that parents have the ability to who know their child, but I don't feel like they should be pressured to send their child. And I feel like all across the country what we're looking at is people being pressured and feeling like there's only one way that education looks at
Right.
ECE, and it's actually harming the communities that we're a part of. That it's very much harming it. So the last question that I've got is, based on what we've discussed, what's one change that you feel like needs to happen to begin repairing these broken branches?
I really feel like this needs to be a funding of a parent's authentic choice. It needs to be recognized that children learn just the same, if not more, that family childcare is a best practice, and that those 3 and 4 year olds and on down the line, they need to be funded in that same equitable manner, whether their parents choose for them to go to a formal TK, kindergarten, UPK, universal preschool, depending on what state you're in and what they call it,
Yeah.
or whether they, as parents, would prefer their child to be in a small family childcare setting. And that extends. It's not just that formal public education run by the state, but also you're looking at charter schools. There are many
Yes.
children that would thrive in a charter school. They need to be funded the same. And whether that's in a private institution, honoring a parent's authentic choice for where they would like to be with their child. Because chances are that private institution, that charter school is going to meet the needs of that child, depending on whether it's a language, whether it's a cultural. There are enclaves of various cultural focuses around the United States that have various values that they would love to be able to instill and to go across into the school system to help cement for their children. But if it's not something that where their tax dollars go for their child, then maybe they aren't placing their children there where they would want to be. In that private sector, as in family childcare, chances are it's going to meet that need, whether it's a language need, because the closest school that also incorporates Spanish is totally on the other side of the city, or whether that's
Yep.
Mandarin, Cantonese. There's still enclave of Portuguese speakers. Here, we actually, in a lot of the advocacy that we
Yep.
do, There is a large Portuguese population.
Correlation.
Here in
Yep.
California, when you're looking at just the movement of people across the United States, you had with the gold rush that brought a large amount of people from different cultural backgrounds. If you could access all of those and give parents access to placing their children for that authentic choice, it would be an absolute game changer for
I
parents.
think so. I think so also. Funding equity is a real struggle because um that again they do consider public school to be the gold standard, but at the same time we have to actually acknowledge that public school may not always be serving children at their level. It may not be serving the parents and their families the way they need it, but because they are covering a large expanse of the community. That is by nature what it's there for. But at the same time, we need these children to actually know how to read and write and do math. So
Right?
sending them to a program that works for them should always be the first
Yeah.
goal.
Because
That
there's
should
so much of
always
math in life. I mean, you talk about your grandmother who couldn't cook, but your great grandmother could. There is so much of math in cooking, in regular life. And many of these institutionalized programs, they don't access that. And so we have a large section of the population who has maybe a lot of book smarts, but maybe not so many street smarts. How they're going to figure out whether it's their water bill to peak times, to not peak times, electricity, all of these kinds of things,
yeah.
that there is so much of all of this math and learning naturally occurring in life that these smaller programs tend to actually access and utilize, but are
Yeah.
not accessed and utilized in more institutionalized programs typically.
And I don't think that I think in my head funding school systems working with community, what this is what we're identified as community partners, community care, utilizing their community care as a way to help children. Like if you have a children in your program that's going to the TK at the school and they are having a miserable time, they're learning nothing, they and everything,
They're getting in
maybe
trouble more than they're
both
learning.
more than that. Yes, maybe the public school being able to contact us in the local family child care programs that have these programs in there and everything, being able to contact me and go, hey, do you have a spot? We have a child we think would benefit from a smaller location, and everything. Boom. You now have this child actually learning and enjoying the process of learning instead of it being a constant battle,
And
which
funded
leads to,
the same way.
yes, yes, but also stops teacher hemorrhaging from the field. Because I just literally saw a TikTok of a teacher who was only teaching for 1 year and she was teaching kindergarten and had children beating her up and throwing things at her. And she ended up quitting because she had no support from her admin
It's sad.
and stuff. This
I
is
love for
this is what
kindergarten.
we're
It's not for the faint of heart.
no, it's not. And I love kindergarten. Kindergarten is I love these little kids, but I also have a small group. And when people look at me sideways when I'm talking to other ECE educators, because I'm like, I have never had huge behavioral issues like that in my program. And they're like, you're lying. Like, no, because I'm a consistent, they see me every day. I'm the
Continuity of
same
care. It's a
person. Care is,
comfortable environment. It isn't with, and you can get deep into the weeds of, lights and radiation and all of those kinds of things. It's a comfortable environment where you are on their level. You have the time, you have
yes.
the number, the ratio versus all of these other factors that are in a more institutionalized setting. But yeah, there are kids that need it. And the United States, a government as a whole, it needs to recognize that just because it's a different setting does not mean it's less than. But it also needs to wake up to a lot of just the child development and scientific reasons
Yeah.
behind brain development and understand that this is what they need.
Yes, it's very, very true. And again, we've gone over time. This is going to be an editing nightmare. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
so, well, if you were hoping for a neat little root system, surprise! It's a whole knot of policies, power plays, and public perception. And it's been choking out progress for decades. Huge thanks to Rebecca for helping us untangle some of the mess. And if your head's spinning, good. That means you're paying attention. Take a breath, untwist what you can, and get ready. Because next episode, we're not just pulling roots, we're exposing who's been yanking the vines all along. See you there. Bye.